He thought it was just a joke, but when the quiet kid in the back solved the hardest problem in class, the whole room froze. It started with a laugh. Mr. Billings, 40-something, wiry frame, glasses always slipping down his nose, was wrapping up a Tuesday math class at Millwood Junior High in Bakersfield, California. The kind of class where the clock seems louder than the kids and everyone's just counting down the last 5 minutes before lunch. All right, he said, tossing a dry erase marker from one hand to the other. Before you all sprint out of here like your chairs caught fire, let's try something fun. He turned to the whiteboard and scribbled out a tangled equation that looked more like alien code than math. x2, 6x plus 9, a0. Solve for x. He tapped the board twice and turned to face the class, grinning. Now let's see if any of you can solve what stumped even my 9th graders last week. What do you say, Elijah? The way he said it, it wasn't malicious. Not exactly. But it was clear he wasn't expecting an answer. It was a joke. A harmless little joke. The class chuckled. A few heads turned toward the back corner of the room where Elijah Freeman sat, chin resting on his hand, notebook open but untouched for the last 10 minutes, pen still moving across the page, drawing what looked like a maze of numbers and symbols only he understood. Elijah didn't look up right away, but then he stood, didn't say a word. He walked up to the front of the room, his footsteps soft but steady. His oversized hoodie swallowed his arms, and his left sneaker squeaked slightly with every step. He took the marker from Mr. Billings without asking. Okay, he mumbled. The room quieted. Not because anyone expected much, but because Elijah had never once raised his hand in class. Ever. He stared at the board for maybe 4 seconds, then began. x2, 6x plus 9 equals 0, he said, his voice low but clear. That's a perfect square trinomial, so you factor it like this. His hand moved fast, confident, like he wasn't guessing, like he'd done this before. x3 equals 0, so x is 3. He stepped back, placed the marker on the ledge, and looked at Mr. Billings, not smug, not looking for praise, just done. Silence, dead silence. A chair creaked. Someone whispered, "Wait, what?" Mr. Billings blinked, once, twice. That's correct, he finally said, scratching the back of his neck. Yeah, that's exactly right. Elijah didn't react. He just went back to his seat like nothing happened. But something had happened. A few kids clapped, half sarcastic, half confused. Others just stared at the board, then at Elijah. Mr. Billings looked like he'd seen a ghost. Not because Elijah was wrong, because he was right, and because he didn't see it coming. No one did. But that wasn't the end of it, because what started as a joke in one classroom would turn into a conversation that reached far beyond those 4 walls. Elijah Freeman was the kind of kid people didn't really notice, until they had to. He lived with his mom, Denise, and his grandfather, Charles, in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on East Truxton Avenue, nothing fancy. A cracked screen door that didn't quite shut. A living room that smelled like lemon cleaner and fried fish on Fridays. Denise worked night shifts at the Stater Brothers grocery store and still managed to help Elijah with homework when she got home at 6 a.m. Eyes heavy, coffee in hand, she'd sit at the kitchen table and check his math worksheets while he got dressed for school. She didn't have a degree, but she had grit, and she made sure Elijah knew he mattered, even if the world sometimes didn't seem to. His grandfather, Charles, was a retired mechanic who believed in 2 things, hard work and minding your business. But when it came to Elijah, he made exceptions. He'd sit for hours listening to the boy explain things like Fibonacci sequences and why prime numbers were kind of like loners at a party. He's not just smart, Charles would say. He's different. Elijah didn't talk much, not because he was shy. He just didn't like wasting words. His classmates knew him as the quiet kid who never got in trouble, never made a scene, and always finished his tests before everyone else. He kept a small black notebook with him at all times, filled cover to cover with puzzles, equations, and little theories he didn't dare show anyone. He once built a calculator out of scrap parts from an old keyboard and a busted TV remote. He called it Frank, for reasons no one understood, and carried it in his backpack like it was some kind of invention from a secret lab. But the truth? Elijah didn't think of himself as gifted. He didn't have a label for what he could do. He just liked solving things. Things make sense when they have an answer, he told his mom once. People don't always have answers. In school, well, it didn't always feel like a place for kids like him. Not because he wasn't smart, but because teachers often talked around him instead of to him. They gave him basic worksheets while others got extra challenges. They told his mom, he's doing fine, with that tone. The one that says, let's not expect too much. Elijah noticed. He always noticed. Still, he didn't complain. He stayed in his lane. He figured if he kept his head down and his grades up, someone would eventually see what he saw in himself. But what no one saw coming was how one random joke on a Tuesday afternoon would finally push Elijah's name into conversations he was never supposed to be part of. Word got around faster than gum under a desk. By lunch, half the 7th grade was talking about it. Some kids were replaying it like a viral clip. Yo, did you see Elijah solve that crazy problem? Others were more skeptical. Mr. Billings probably gave him the answer before class. Nah, it was just luck. He probably saw it on YouTube or something. But one thing was clear. Elijah Freeman was no longer invisible. At his usual lunch spot, behind the cafeteria near the vending machines, he sat cross-legged with his back to the wall, eating a turkey sandwich from home. He didn't say much, didn't smile, just quietly chewed while his eyes scanned a Sudoku book from the dollar store. That's when Kareem Reynolds, a classmate who normally didn't speak to him, walked over. Yo, that was crazy what you did in math today, Kareem said, almost like it was a dare to admit it out loud. Elijah glanced up. Thanks. You study that stuff or something? I just like it. Kareem nodded slowly, awkward, like he didn't know what else to say. Then added, you should be in like AP or whatever. That wasn't normal. Elijah shrugged. Maybe it's just not normal for people like me. That last part, he didn't mean it to come out, but it hung in the air like a spark with nowhere to land. Later that afternoon, Mr. Billings stood in front of the faculty lounge's grimy coffee machine, holding a paper cup that steamed but didn't smell like coffee. 2 other teachers, Mrs. Copeland from Social Studies and Mr. Green from Science, were talking about student behavior when he cut in. So, weird thing happened in my class today, and he told them. About Elijah, about the joke, about how the kid walked up like it was no big deal and solved the problem that had stumped his high school students just days ago. Mrs. Copeland raised an eyebrow. Elijah Freeman? Denise's boy? Yup. Huh, she said, sipping her lukewarm tea. He doesn't say much in my class. Same, said Mr. Green. Always finishes labs early, but I thought he was just rushing. I didn't know he was actually getting it. Mr. Billings hesitated before he said it. I mean, I didn't think he'd get it either. It was kind of a joke, you know? The room got quiet. Not angry quiet, just that heavy pause when people realize something might be deeper than they want to admit. Mrs. Copeland folded her arms. Is it a joke because it was a hard problem, or because you didn't think he could solve it? Mr. Billings didn't answer, but that silence? It said plenty. Meanwhile, Principal Dorsey had already gotten wind of what happened. A parent had called, not Elijah's, someone else's. How come my kid's not being challenged like that? They asked. Why is a 7th grader solving 9th grade math? Dorsey was no fool. He pulled Elijah's academic records that afternoon. Straight A's in every math class since 3rd grade. Perfect state testing scores. Barely any disciplinary notes, but also barely any notes at all. No recommendations for honors, no mention of gifted evaluations, just average, neutral. Like no one had bothered to really see him. But now that everyone was paying attention, the question wasn't just how Elijah solved that problem, it was why no one thought he could in the first place. The next morning, the mood in the teacher's lounge had shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just different. There was a new kind of tension that didn't have a name, but everyone could feel it, like something had been exposed, and nobody wanted to say it out loud. Mr. Billings walked in carrying his usual paper bag lunch. Peanut butter sandwich, bag of pretzels, apple. He sat down at the table near the window and opened the bag, eyes low, like he didn't want to make eye contact with anyone. Mrs. Copeland was already there, stirring honey into her tea, while Mr. Green read the local news on his phone. Neither of them said a word at first. Finally, Mr. Green broke the silence. You see what the district sent out this morning? What? Mr. Billings asked. Email about identifying underrepresented students in advanced coursework. It's timely. Billings let out a slow breath. Yeah, I saw it. Mrs. Copeland didn't look up. It shouldn't take a seventh grader embarrassing half the school to start talking about that. No one was embarrassed, Billings said defensively. It wasn't like that. Mrs. Copeland raised an eyebrow. Wasn't it? He put down his sandwich. Look, I didn't mean anything by it. It was just a moment. A light-hearted thing. Mr. Green nodded slowly. Right. But light-hearted for who, though? And there it was. That question no one liked to touch. It wasn't about the math. It wasn't about the equation. It was about what teachers expected and who they expected it from. And what happened when those quiet assumptions got shattered in front of a room full of seventh graders. Because the truth was, there were other Elijahs. Kids who never raised their hands. Kids who stayed under the radar. Kids who had stopped trying because they knew the ceiling was already set for them. The district's email had hit a nerve. It asked teachers to reflect on their biases, intentional or not, and to start documenting student potential more aggressively. Not just behavior, not just grades, potential. That word made some teachers uncomfortable. How are we supposed to measure potential? One of them said later that day in a staff meeting. It's not on the test. But Mrs. Copeland had a different take. Maybe it starts with not assuming who's capable and who's not, based on who's loudest in class. Back in his own classroom, Mr. Billings sat in front of his laptop, scrolling through Elijah's old assignments. Neat handwriting, every problem solved, extra steps shown even when they weren't required. He looked at the comments he'd written in red pen. Nice job. Correct. Well done. That was it. No questions, no challenges, no encouragement to go further. Just polite check marks and a quiet dismissal. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. It wasn't that he thought Elijah wasn't smart. It's that he never bothered to wonder how smart he was. And worse, maybe he didn't expect him to be. But now he couldn't stop wondering how many other Elijahs had passed through his classroom without ever being asked to show what they knew. 2 days later, Elijah sat outside the front office with his backpack on his lap and his hoodie sleeves pulled over his hands. Inside, his mom was sitting across from Principal Dorsey and Mr. Billings in a small office that smelled faintly of printer ink and air freshener. Denise Freeman was tired, not just from her overnight shift stacking shelves and dealing with customers who pretended not to see her, not just from the aching in her feet. She was tired of meetings like this, meetings that didn't usually lead anywhere, meetings that danced around things without ever naming them. But this one was different. We wanted to talk with you about something Elijah did this week, Mr. Billings started. Denise crossed her arms. He in trouble? No, Dorsey said quickly. Not at all. Actually, it's the opposite. They explained what happened in the math class, the problem, the solution, the reaction. Mr. Billings even pulled out a printed copy of the equation, like he needed visual proof that this really happened. Denise didn't flinch. Yeah, that sounds like my boy. That threw Mr. Billings off a little. You're not surprised? I've been watching him solve stuff like that since he was 9. You all just never asked. Dorsey cleared his throat. That's why we called you in. We feel Elijah might benefit from a more advanced learning track, possibly even early placement into our STEM partnership program with Bakersfield High. Denise leaned forward, her voice sharp but not raised. Let me ask you something. If he got all A's for the last 3 years, if his test score's been high, if his teacher's been saying he's doing fine, why wasn't this conversation happening before? Silence. Mr. Billings looked down. Dorsey nodded slowly. You're right. That's on us. And we're trying to make it right now. Denise didn't say anything right away. She looked toward the door where she knew Elijah was waiting. He's smart, she said, but he's also quiet, not the type to demand attention. That doesn't mean he doesn't deserve it. We agree, Dorsey said, and we want to start evaluating him for gifted services, effective immediately. Mr. Billings added, and if you're open to it, I'd like to offer Elijah an opportunity to help tutor some of his peers, if he's interested. Denise raised an eyebrow. So now he's good enough to teach? Billings opened his mouth, then closed it. I deserve that. She gave a half smile, not because it was funny, but because at least he owned it. When the meeting ended, Denise stepped out and found Elijah still sitting exactly where she left him. He looked up, eyes searching hers. What'd they say? She crouched down in front of him, smoothing a wrinkle in his sleeve. They finally figured out what I've been telling you, she said. You're not just smart, baby. You're ready. He didn't say anything, just nodded once. But inside, something shifted. It wasn't pride, not exactly. It was something deeper. Like, for the first time, someone outside his family had actually noticed. But with new attention came new pressure, and Elijah was about to learn that being seen is only half the battle. By the following week, Elijah wasn't just a name on a student roster. He was a topic. At Millwood Junior High, in teacher meetings, hallway whispers, and even emails between administrators, people were suddenly very interested in what he could do. A district STEM coordinator named Mr. Alvarez came down from the Bakersfield Unified School office to observe him during class. He wore a navy blazer and brown loafers with no socks, and he carried a clipboard like it was glued to his hand. Elijah, he said, smiling too wide, can you walk me through your thinking on this one? Elijah looked at the geometry problem in front of him and solved it in under a minute. Then he turned the paper sideways and reworked it a different way, just to prove the answer was solid. Alvarez leaned over and whispered something to Mr. Billings, who nodded. After school, Elijah was invited to visit the district's STEM lab over at Bakersfield High. It was a sleek, modern space with glass walls and a floor that looked like polished graphite. He met two juniors who were building a low-cost prosthetic hand using a 3D printer, and a girl his age named Naraya who coded simple animations in JavaScript for fun. She gave Elijah a crooked smile and said, "You knew?" He nodded. Kinda. They ended up sitting at the same table. Neither said much. But when Naraya slid her laptop over and asked him to fix a broken line of code, Elijah didn't hesitate. 5 keystrokes later, the screen came to life. "That's what I thought," she said. "You don't talk a lot, huh?" He smirked. "I only talk when it's worth it." Back at school, though, not everyone was celebrating. Some of the kids started to treat Elijah different. Not mean exactly, but distant. Like he wasn't one of them anymore. Kareem stopped sitting near him at lunch. A few others joked that Elijah thinks he's better now. One kid even said, loud enough for others to hear, "Guess you gotta solve fancy equations to get people to care about you around here." That one stung, because Elijah didn't ask to be noticed. He didn't raise his hand for attention. The spotlight was never the goal. At home, he told his mom, "It feels like people only care because I did something they didn't expect me to do." Denise looked at him, serious. "Baby, sometimes the world needs to be surprised before it starts paying attention, but that doesn't mean you owe them anything." He thought about that for a long time. That night, he pulled out his notebook, the one with all the scribbled puzzles and ideas, and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, he wrote, "What if kids like me didn't have to surprise anyone to be seen?" And beneath it, he started designing a program, a basic framework, just notes for now, an idea, a space where kids like him could be mentored, challenged, heard, not because they performed on cue, but because they existed. The next day, he stayed after school and asked Mr. Billings if he could borrow a whiteboard. "For what?" Billings asked. "I want to show you something." Mr. Billings watched as Elijah sketched out the bones of a student-led math club, not for the top 5%, not just for the loud or confident kids, for the ones like him, the ones no one asked to the front of the class unless it was a joke. Billings stared at the board, genuinely stunned. "You really thought this through," he said. "I've been thinking about it for a while," Elijah replied. But now, for the first time, someone was actually listening. 2 months later, the Millwood Problem Solvers Club met every Thursday after school in room 212. It started small. Elijah, Naria, 2 6th graders from down the hall, a quiet 8th grade girl named Alondra, who didn't say a word the first 3 meetings, but never missed a single one. There was no sign-up sheet, no t-shirts, no awards, just a whiteboard, a few desks pushed together, and a space where no one had to prove they belonged. You showed up, you solved stuff. You were part of it. Elijah led each session, but never like a teacher. He didn't stand in front of the class, he sat with them, solved alongside them, asked questions that made people think harder, not feel smaller. One afternoon, Mr. Billings stopped by to drop off some extra graph paper and lingered in the doorway. He watched as Elijah gently helped a younger student work through a logic puzzle without giving away the answer. "He's different now," Billings said later to Principal Dorsey. No, Dorsey replied. He's the same. We're just seeing him clearly for the first time. Outside the club, things didn't magically change overnight. Not for Elijah, not for kids like him. But something had shifted. Other teachers began reevaluating their students, asking better questions, looking closer. A few even sat in on the math club sessions, not to supervise, but to learn. Denise noticed a change at home too. Elijah started talking more. At dinner, he explained fractals using salt and pepper shakers. He laughed more, even joked. One night, while she folded laundry and he worked at the table, he said, I think I want to be a teacher someday. She stopped folding. Yeah? He nodded, but not like the ones who wait until a kid does something amazing to believe in them. I want to be the kind who sees it before anyone else does. She smiled and her eyes welled up. You already are. As for Elijah, he never craved attention. He didn't start wearing medals or making announcements. He didn't care about being famous at school. He just wanted other kids like him to have a place where they weren't treated like a fluke. Because the truth was, the joke in Mr. Billings' classroom wasn't just about a math problem. It was about what people expect from kids like Elijah, what they assume, what they never bother to question. But Elijah? He questioned everything. And that's what made him dangerous, in the best possible way. He showed that brilliance doesn't always come wrapped in confidence, that some of the most capable minds sit quietly in the back, waiting for someone to ask the right question. And when they finally do, everything changes. Because being seen isn't about the spotlight. It's about being believed in, before the performance, without the applause. If you're a student, a parent, a teacher, whoever you are, remember this. There are kids like Elijah in every school, kids with brilliance you can't see at first glance. But it's there, and it's real. Don't wait for a moment to make you notice them. Create the kind of space where they don't have to raise their hand just to be counted. Because sometimes, the smartest kid in the room isn't the loudest. They're just waiting for you to look. Let's make sure we're looking.